Despite being a game with that balance updates intersplicing every major version like you would see in a competitive title, Genshin Impact features a deceptively comprehensive history of character fluctuation. Mind you, there were a few internal systems changes that did cause significant shifts in character performance, but in gacha games, it's rare for units to deviate from their initially perceived rating outside of very specific situations, such as new content coincidentally obligating you to use a specific unit. We've had many characters that were once considered good that became not as good, or vice versa. Units that were once thought of as bad but got better as time went on, usually as a result of more synergistic equipment, teammates, or functions. Seeing as how the base kit of a unit remains the same though, they tend to not move too far from where they were before. If they started out bad, they might become decent at best, which makes it all the more impressive when Kokomi, a character who was at one point prematurely and mistakenly deemed by many to be the spiritual successor to Chi-Chi, a mantle that would have been an embarrassment than honor to inherit, has not only become one of the best characters in the game, but also one of the most widely used characters in the game. This will be the third and final video I make on her to round out her little anime redemption arc thing I got going on, and yes, I understand the irony of having a character with both a why no one and why everyone plays episode. If you're interested in learning more about the chain of events that led to her eventual rise to prominence, I suggest you take a look at my What Happened to video on her after this one. But for today's episode of Why Everyone Plays, we'll be talking about everything in Sango no Miya Kokomi's moveset that makes her one of the most versatile characters in Genshin Impact. What I find funny about her whole situation is that a couple years ago, I felt like her crit restriction was entirely gratuitous. Like it wasn't needed to keep her in check whatsoever. It's not like she did crazy amounts of damage. And even though I still somewhat believe making her unable to crit was an entirely unnecessary limitation, I can somewhat acknowledge why it's there now. The crit restriction gave off a very negative first impression of her, but in a way, it not only encouraged us, but straight up told us to look at the other parts of her gameplay like supporting and driving. I think I distinctly remember criticizing Mihoyo for not thinking things through in her Why No One Plays episode, but in hindsight, it was me who wasn't. Mihoyo knew exactly what they were doing with her. Based on the prevailing notion at the time of crit, players would have incorrectly run crit builds on her, thinking that what worked for everyone before should work for her too, and end up getting disappointed when in reality you're supposed to build her with the idea of supporting in mind, not just dealing damage. Besides, I asked one of my theory crafting friends how much her DPS would go up if she were in fact allowed to crit, and assuming you lose the 25% healing bonus alongside the minus 100% crit, her personal damage doesn't actually increase all that much. That is, unless you're specifically building DPS on her, and why would you ever do that? I guess as a fun analogy, her situation when she first came out was like all of those r/relationship advice posts where the OP's post is like, my wife is the best person ever, kind, gentle, nurturing, pretty, great cook, good with kids, intelligent, always knows when they can use a hug, but she likes to steak medium well. And then you have all the comments being like, instant divorce, tar and feather, drawn and quarter, take the kids, take the car, take the house, take her Netflix password, take everything, just because of that one tiny thing. That was her in a nutshell. Kokomi is what you might call a battle healer. On top of merely existing to top off her team's health bars, she can dish out meaningful damage of her own. That's the core aspect that distinguishes her from the other Hydro healer, Barbara. In the most rudimentary way to put it, Kokomi is Barbara with more offensive capability. That was the first impression everyone had of her, and also why she had such a pitiful first banner. In fact, it was the worst maiden voyage out of any Genshin banner to date. See, while nowadays we have no shortage of reasons to have a healer, back then, healers were for the most part completely overshadowed by the other two main forms of defense, shielding and invincibility frames. When timed correctly, Elemental Burst enabled you to completely avoid critical enemy fire, while shields were every bit superior to healing thanks to not only mitigating damage but granting super armor, removing the need to dodge attacks too since you don't get staggered. So in the early days there wasn't much use for healing until mains and dungeons, while in the overworld you had consumable items and statues to teleport to at any time. When Kokomi was announced, people were already skeptical about pulling for her, not because she was bad, but because we as a community at the time were evaluating her the same way we evaluated everyone else up until that point, which was not the correct way to look at her, and it all stemmed from her passive. Flawless strategy, granting her a base 25% healing bonus but decreasing her crit rate by 100%, effectively locking her out of critical hits. When most people saw that, they were like, oh hell no. Crit stats are viewed as the holy grail of damage for most of version 1, so when they found out Kokomi essentially couldn't crit, they instantly chalked her up as a worthless unit, disregarding everything else, since back then we didn't know better. Now, even a brand new player can appreciate everything she has to offer. Kokomi is the biggest, this age-like fine wine character in Genshin. Her combination of properties, abilities, and typing allowed her to coincidentally receive the most amount of indirect buffs out of any character in the game, besides maybe Xiangling. First, she belongs to Hydro, the best supportive element and honestly the current best element period. What makes Hydro so good is that it's involved in every high-profile reaction right now. Electrocharge, the cornerstone of Taser teams, Frozen, the centerpiece for Cryo teams, Vaporize, the driving force of Pyro teams not involving Linny or Klee, Swirl, self-explanatory, and Bloom, Dentro's premier reaction. You'd have to actively be trying not to use Hydro basically. Second, Kokomi has the best supportive function and the best supportive element. Provided you're not trying to achieve forward vaporize, Hydra's damage output is entirely irrelevant. Application is the name of the game. The more wet status you can apply to your enemies, the better, and more importantly, the more coverage you have, the better. For once, being a Catalyst user actually works in her favor, as it means she always deals elemental damage not just through her abilities but her normal attacks as well. Third, Kokomi delivers the best supportive function of the best supportive element in the best way possible. She has 100% uptime, autonomous off-field AoE application, literally the best case scenario for a Hydro character. Her elemental skill spawns a water jellyfish that scares away all Hu Tao players within a 5-mile radius, pulsating Hydro damage to nearby enemies while healing friendlies. While the jellyfish only lasts for 12 seconds and has a summoning cooldown of 20, her first ascension passive is kinda like Visual's Burst, where it refreshes the summon time, allowing it to sustain it for up to 24 seconds, at which point your skill will have come off cooldown, letting you maintain it indefinitely. Kuraga's Oath is, to my knowledge, the only 100% uptime off-field source of Hydro application that we know of, as everyone else has downtime or requires them to be the active character, and she can do this without needing a specific weapon, artifact set, or constellation. Why this is such a big deal is that autonomous off-field application allows her tons of party fluidity, no pun intended, making her the perfect fit for almost every kind of reaction-centric team you can think of. In Taser and Soup teams, her jellyfish can sit right in the middle of Sucrose's, Venti's, whatever crowd control you want, and take care of your Hydra's needs while the rest of your crew lays down to her. In Bloom teams, the application interval lets you consistently spawn Dendro cores. In Freeze teams, her jellyfish combos nicely with the persistent effects of cryo units like Shinhook, Ayaka, Ganyu, Diona, and whatnot. The only reaction where autonomous application can kind of mess things up is Vaporize, but I mean hell, she covers everything else. Asking for any more is unreasonable at that point. So by sheer coincidence, she happened to check off every box that made for a good support character in the current meta, on top of having things work in her favor very nicely. To name a few, Hydro Resonance was changed a while back to give max HP, and Kokomi is an HP scaler. Technically the previous healing bonus buff was also applicable to her, but max HP is more practical. There was also of course Dendro, and by extension Nilu, who forces you to bring only Hydro or Dendro healers, disqualifying you from using Jean, Sayu, Bennett, Shinobu, etc. Your choices are either her, Barbara, Yao Yao, or Baidu, and of the four, Kokomi is the most flexible and consistent option. Speaking of team flexibility, that's the second reason everyone plays her. Kokomi is the Swiss Army knife of Genshin. In addition to the seamless Hydro application, she's a healer, which evidently is becoming more and more necessary both in Spiral Abyss and in the overworld. She's a Catalyst user, which gives her access to very helpful supportive equipment, chief among them being the old reliable Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, a discount Bennett burst on a weapon essentially. Tenacity of the Millilith can also buff up her team's attack by an extra 20% with her jellyfish, so she can actually bump up your team's DPS really nicely through weapons and artifacts. She's also kind of a tank. Stacking all the health on her can send her easily above 30k health, meaning if the rest of your party is heavily injured, you can switch to her to face tank for your team a bit. Combine that with her on-hit regeneration from her ultimate and you're almost never at risk of dying. If that weren't enough, Kokomi actually deals damage, like a lot of damage. She can be a veritable sub-DPS. In exchange for being practically unable to crit, she's a hyperscaler. When activating her burst, all her damage increases based on her max health. Her jellyfish does bonus damage and all of her normal attacks do bonus damage. Plus, through her other ascension passive, 15% of her healing bonus gets funneled into her max health damage. Basically, at the cost of not having as high of a ceiling as other Hydro attackers, she has easily the highest floor thanks to her immense base output. It's also important to note that all of this is based on her own individual strength, not counting external buffs, so she can contribute good DPS when given the opportunity. Obviously for most teams you're not sitting on her as the active unit for too long, only to regen your party or when there's no one else to field at the moment. But for a quote-unquote support, she does pretty good damage, and that's actually what I think makes her more favorable than just about every other healer in the game who isn't Bennett. Thanks to her damage floor being so high, Kokomi is debatably the only defensive support, again besides Bennett and maybe Shinobu and Hyperbloom, who doesn't slash her damage output by including her. Defensive options naturally force you to lose out on some offensive capability with that insurance policy. Now depending on how you look at it, more defense means more room for offense since you don't have to worry too much about dodging and stuff. But in general, when you field someone like Zhongli, you have to accept a DPS cut in favor of more comfort. For Kokomi, you don't really have to do that. Granted, you're not getting anywhere near the same damage boost as Yelan, but point being, many teams were previously hamstrung by lack of sustenance or protection, yet at the same time couldn't afford to swap out a character slot for a healer while staying competitive with other teams. Ayaka's best team for example is her, Shinho, Kazuha, and a Hydro unit. If you and Shincho, you'd achieve freeze quite easily, but won't have the luxury of face tanking that many hits. The original Taser team of Sucrose, Shincho, Beidou, and Fischl had the same issue, not much room for error, same with Nilu. Before Yao Yao and Baizu came out, your only choices were either Barbara or Kokomi. Barbara does legit 0 damage on her own. In fairness, your DPS is focused on Nilu's bountiful cores, not your healer, but on top of having more generous application, Kokomi does actual damage. She consolidates every defensive and supportive role into one character that in a meta where party slot efficiency is becoming increasingly more paramount, she covers so many bases for so many teams in so many situations. One other thing about her that makes her so team agnostic is that she doesn't need anyone. Everything she offers is entirely packaged into just her. For instance, Shenling's immense off-field DPS is only under the condition that you have Bennett glued to her. If you don't use them together, you're basically griefing. Kokomi doesn't need anyone, which means she can squeeze into any team she wants and function all the same, making her debatably one of the best characters for Spiral Abyss, as you can send all of your other supports like Bennett, Zhongli, Xingqiu, whoever into your other team, and Kokomi can do the healing, tanking, buffing, and hydro application for her current team. Third reason would have to be her ease of access. She's very easy to build. Her best weapon is literally a 3-star catalyst. You probably have millions of thrilling tales collecting dust. She requires no constellation. All of her constellations are basically personal damage increases, but that's not her main focus. Being unable to crit, you can pretty much get close to min-max on her without too much effort. Max HP and energy recharge. Maybe elemental mastery if you want to mult, but realistically, optimizing her artifacts or getting close to optimal is far easier on her than the majority of the cast. Normally in gacha games, having a low ceiling is bad for a character, but that actually works in Kokomi's favor, as it means you don't need much to get the most out of her. In a way, she's the Zhongli of the current generation. She exists to make your life comfy. You might lose out on a tiny bit of damage, but with all the upsides to her, it's more than worth the trade-off. Plus, she's more adaptable. Zhongli doesn't have any reaction support due to Geo, while she belongs to the best reaction element in the game. There aren't that many supportive polearms, but there are sure as hell many supportive catalysts. If we're talking purely defense, shields are still for the most part better, but having sustenance ensures you can recover any damage that manages to break through shields. The only disadvantage with her is that her jellyfish can't move, but you can always just use her ultimate and regenerate off normal attacks. She's just a good jack-of-all-trades character. Good damage, good utility, good healing, good defense, good application, good everything. Other Hydro units, heck, other anyone might beat her out in one specific field, but she beats them out everywhere else. Xingqiu has more Hydro application than her, but she has more area coverage. Yelan has more off-field damage, but Kokomi has more healing. Bennett has way more offensive utility than her, but she has reaction support. I actually believe Kokomi is a very character who shifted our understanding of Genshin's units. The fact that so many people, admittedly myself as well, discarded her at the beginning just because they saw that crit passive, but then came to realize over time how valuable everything else about her is, might be the reason we can better ascertain the value of other units too. For example, initial assumptions of Nilou were divisive when everyone saw that she could only use Hydro and Dendro characters, but we were able to look past that and evaluate the trade-off, only to find out Nilou Bloom is one of the strongest teams in the game. That mentality shift may have been influenced by Kokomi. Things went perfectly for her. Not only did her own traits age very well over time, but surrounding circumstances also helped her out a ton. To be honest, I might consider her the most future-proof character in the game. There's physically no way she can be power-crept if you think about it. If there's a Hydra unit with more damage, they probably don't heal, and even if they can heal, they probably don't have consistent healing. And even if they have consistent healing, they probably don't have good area coverage. And if they have area coverage, they probably don't have as good application. I think that's why she manages to stand out in spite of Xingqiu and Yelan. She's too versatile to be ignored. The only way she gets phased out is if there's a 6-star Kokomi in the future. That's it. Easily one of the best characters in the game, and it's embarrassing many of us assumed she would be one of the worst when she first came out. I think that about covers everything I want to talk about, and thus ends the Kokomi trilogy. Let me know your thoughts on her in the comments down below, whether you agree or disagree with my points. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you left a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why Everyone Plays videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.